I want to talk to you about the development of early modern painting. And in just a minute we'll be on page 53 in your textbooks, so you might as well head to page 53 in your textbooks. On the screen you see figure 9.1, Cimabue's Madonna Enthroned. We'll be talking about this painting in just a minute. But I want to, before we get to page 53, I want to talk to you about the development of early modern painting. As this group of artists decided they wanted to recreate and reinvent the art form of painting, they set a goal for themselves. They said that we'll know that we've succeeded, that we've recreated the art form when we make a painting that looks real, when we make a painting that looks realistic. That's the goal they set for themselves, that a painting should look real, it should look realistic. In fact, the phrase over and over again that the early modern painters used to describe what their goal was they said a painting should be a window on the world. A window on the world. The idea is that when you hang a painting on a wall, on some level, it ought to fool the eye into thinking you're looking through a window at another part of the world. Of course, you know you're looking at a painting. But on some level, it creates an optical illusion that you're looking through a window at another part of the world. And this window on the world idea shows up an awful lot in the writings of the late medieval artists and painters, and it's had a big influence on Western culture. Even today, although very few artists have even tried to make a painting look real for the last, 150 years, even today, if you ask most people on the street, well, what would make a painting a good painting? They say, well, a painting is a good painting if it looks real. It affects the way that the culture thinks about painting. It affects the way we talk about painting. What do we call the wooden part around a painting? A frame. What do we call the wooden part around a window? A frame. You see, the painting frame is named for the window frame. And I want to talk about some of the ways of making a painting look real. One way is in the setting of the painting. Now, I'll draw your attention to page 53 in your textbooks. On the screen, you see figure 9.1, Cimabue's Madonna Enthroned. You see Cimabue's name in the caption there for figure 9.1 on page 53. Right next to it on page 53, you see Giotto's Madonna Enthroned. And you see Giotto's name in the title of the painting, Madonna Enthroned, on page 53 in your textbook. Here we have two identical scenes of the Madonna Enthroned, Mary sitting on a throne holding baby Jesus, surrounded by saints and angels and all those kinds of people. In your textbook, the paintings are arranged in chronological order. So Cimabue's painting, what you see on the screen here, figure 9.1 in your textbook, is a generation earlier than Giotto's painting of the same scene, figure 9.2 in your textbooks. And so it's useful having them right next to each other in your textbook and knowing that this, Giotto's painting, is the more recent painting and that Cimabue's painting is the earlier painting. One way of creating a painting that looks real is to pay attention to the setting of the painting. Let's take a look at Cimabue's Madonna Enthroned here. We can make out the scene well enough in the textbook here. We see Mary sitting on a throne, holding baby Jesus, surrounded by saints and angels and all those kinds of people. But think about the setting of the painting here. How does Mary get off the throne? What if she needs to go change baby Jesus' diaper? How does she get off the throne? Well, I guess she takes one step down and then kind of dangles from her toes and then drops 8 feet down to the ground. It's not a very realistic setting, you see. It's not the kind of setting that belongs to this world, you see, where people just sit on thrones 10 feet up in the air. If, though, we look at Giotto's Madonna Enthroned, figure 9.2 in your textbooks on page 53, it's a much more realistic setting. It's much more a setting that belongs to our world. Here again we see Mary holding baby Jesus. By the way, you may have noticed, even back on Cimabue's Madonna Enthroned, baby Jesus is doing the peace sign thing with his fingers. You thought I made that up, didn't you? Well, there you see it. It's the blessing, the sign of blessing there. Anyway, here we see Mary holding baby Jesus, surrounded by saints and angels and those kind of people, but it's a much more realistic setting. What does Mary need to do? What happens if Mary needs to go take care of business? Well, she just steps down, a few steps down to the ground and then goes off and takes care of business. Then she comes back and she sits on the throne here. It's a much more realistic setting. It belongs much more to this world. If we go back to Cimabue's Madonna enthroned here, another way of making a painting look real is to capture what's called a sense of perspective. That's perspective, just what you think I'm saying. It's P-E-R-S-P-E-C-T-I-V-E, perspective. That word perspective has a lot of different meanings in the English language. It means a lot of different things, even in the visual arts, even in painting. And so to try to keep things simple for us for the rest of the semester, I'm going to try, at least, when I use the word perspective and I'm talking about a painting, I'm going to try to use the word perspective to only mean one thing, and that is to capture an illusion of depth. An illusion of depth. Perspective, an illusion of depth. That's illusion, like a trick. I-L-L-U-S-I-O-N. Not illusion, but illusion. I-L-L-U-S-I-O-N, like a trick. An illusion of depth. Not death, but depth. D-E-P-T-H. An illusion of depth. In other words, to fool the eye into thinking you're looking at a three-dimensional object when you're really looking at a flat board with paint on it. To fool the eye, to trick the eye into thinking that you're looking at a round object, a three-dimensional rounded object, instead of a flat board with color on it. Notice some ways that Cimabue tries to create this illusion of depth. For example, if we look at the robe hanging between Mary's knees here, there's an attempt to fool the eye into thinking there's a body underneath the robe, but it's not very successful. Stick with me, because I think you'll see what I mean when we look at Giotto's Madonna enthroned. And if we... there we go. If we look at the area here again, the robe covering Mary's knees, there's much more of an illusion that there are rounded knees underneath the robe there, that there's a rounded body underneath the robe. Go back and forth between figures 9.1 in your textbook and 9.2 in your textbook and see if you don't see what I mean. There's more of that sense of roundness. There's more perspective in Giotto's painting. Notice all the roundedness in the painting, the roundedness in Mary's facial features, in Jesus' facial features, the round knees, the round shoulder of baby Jesus up here, the rounded faces and hands and shoulders of the figures over to the side. And notice some of the ways that Giotto creates that sense of perspective. Notice how Mary is sitting towards the front of the throne there. If she sat further back, and maybe if you just think about what I just said, she's sitting towards the front of the throne. If she scooted further back into the throne, you notice that three-dimensional quality? If she sat further back, she'd be underneath this cupola-looking thing here, whatever the fancy word is for this thing, this little roof thing. Notice that if we look back here, for example, it's darker back there than it is over here. Now, this isn't rocket science kind of stuff. I'm not trying to impress you with a great observation here. I'm just pointing out to you that, the sun is shining, is casting a shadow. But notice all the different shadows in the painting. And again, this shows up better in your textbook photograph because it's slightly larger and the photograph's a little bit easier to look at. But notice all the shadows in the painting. The shadows underneath Mary's eyebrow, the shadows underneath her nose, the shadows in between her lips, the shadow under her lip, the shadow of her jawline, the shadow cast by her cheekbone. Notice the shadows in between the fingers of Mary, baby Jesus, the shadows in the folds of cloth and the robes of the figures. So some parts of the painting are darker than other parts. Notice how some parts of the painting are brighter than other parts. You see the light reflecting off the top of Mary's forehead, off the top of the bridge of her nose, the top of her cheekbones, the light reflecting off the top of baby Jesus' shoulder, the top of his hands, the light reflecting off the rounded shoulders of the figures to the right, and the left for that matter. So some parts of the painting are darker than others, some parts of the painting are brighter than others. Again, this isn't brain surgery kind of stuff. I'm not trying to impress you by pointing this out, just pointing it out to you. There's not the shadowing in the painting, which leads to that sense of perspective. Well, for all these reasons and some others as well, soon after Giotto's death he was given a title. and called the founder of modern painting. He's called the founder of modern painting not because he's the first person who tries to paint in the modern period. That's not at all the case. But he's called the founder of modern painting because he's the first person who, during his own lifetime, people said he's done it. He's captured that sense of perspective. On some level, he's fooled the eye into thinking we're looking at a rounded object when in reality we're looking at a flat board. Now, of course, we know we're looking at a painting, but on some level, he's created an optical illusion here that we're looking at a three-dimensional scene. We're looking almost like through a window at what could be another part of the world. Well, that title is the significant one, Giotto, the founder of modern painting. And I'll have some more to say about Giotto in a minute, but I want to stick with this idea, with this theme of looking at the development of early modern painting. And to do that, I want to compare two other paintings. Two paintings on pages 54 and 55 in your textbook. So if you turn your page just once to page 54 and 55 in your textbooks, you'll see first, Duccio's Annunciation of the Death of the Virgin, figure 9-5 on page 54. And right across the spread, figure 9-8, Martini's Annunciation. Martini's Annunciation, figure 9-8 on page 55. So on pages 54, we're looking at figures 9-5 and 9... Whoops. What happened? There we go. Now we're to figure 9-5. And we just were on figure 9-8. Figure 9-5, Duccio's Annunciation of the Death of the Virgin. Again, you see the name Duccio in the title of the painting and the caption for figure 9-5. And Martini's Annunciation, figure 9-8. In your textbook, the paintings are in chronological order in terms of when they were painted. Duccio's painting is a generation before Martini's painting. But they're in reverse order in terms of the Mary story. Martini's Annunciation, what you see on the screen here, figure 9-8, is at the start of the Mary story. An angel shows up and tells Mary, you're going to become pregnant and give birth to the Christ child. You may be able to notice, if you look carefully at your textbook photograph, it's almost like there's a scratch on the painting here. Those are actually Greek words. Do you see how the words are coming out of the angel's mouth and going into Mary's ear? It's almost like an old-fashioned cartoon bubble. What it says is, a son will be born to you. Almost like a cartoon bubble, the words coming out of the angel's mouth going right into Mary's ear. Well, anyway, that's at the start of the Mary story. Figure 9-5 on page 54 is at the end of the Mary story. An angel shows up and tells Mary, announcing the news that it's time for you to die. So there are different scenes in the Mary story, but they are similar enough that it helps to make some comparisons. Let's start with Duccio's Annunciation of the Death of the Virgin, figure 9-5 on page 54. Take a look at Mary here. Take a look at her facial expression, her body language, her hand gesturing. What's going on in Mary's mind here? What's Mary's response to this news? Well, usually when I ask this question in a lecture hall with students present, I usually get three answers. Either rejecting the news, accepting the news, or, it's hard to tell. If we look at Martini's Annunciation, figure 9-8 in your textbook. Once my computer wakes up, come on, there we go. Take a look at Mary here, her body language, her facial expression, her hand gesturing. What's Mary's response to this news? Usually in a classroom I get a whole bunch of different responses all at once. The point here isn't to get to a true-false answer on an exam, but just to point out to you, I think we would agree that there's more going on with Martini's Mary here than there was with Duccio's Mary. Here Mary is sitting on her desk, the angel shows up and says, "It's time for you to die," and her response is kind of blank. It's hard to really see much response here. I think we would agree that when we look at Martini's Mary, there's more going on. There's a hesitation, there's maybe a distrust, there's a hint of modesty as she pulls her robe across her chest. There's all kinds of more response going on with Martini's Mary here. And this is part of the development of modern painting. This is part of making a painting look real, is to capture the emotion of what's going on in the characters in the story. That's more than just artsy-fartsy, capturing the emotion kind of stuff. But no, that's seriously what makes a painting look real. In real life, you see, some of you have had this experience, when you've been with someone who is told that they're going to die, the doctor has bad news or whatever, there's usually some kind of response, not just Mary sitting there putting her hands up in the air and going, whatever kind of response that is. Because people in real life have reactions to news, and when we look at Martini's Mary, there's more of an emotional response. And again, that's more than just capturing the emotion kind of thing, but really, that's what makes a painting look real. But before we move on from these two paintings, I want to back up one more time to Duccio's Annunciation of the Death of the Virgin here, just to take a look at the setting of the painting. Notice all the things that Duccio knows he needs to do to make a painting look real, but he's not quite sure how to do it. Let's start at the top of the painting. Notice up here the beams in the ceiling. Duccio knows that if he wants to create the illusion that you're looking at a real room there, that those beams have to be at angles to each other. But whatever angles those beams should be at, it's not that one. I can never figure out whether this room is 3 feet deep or 300 yards deep, but one way or the other those angles don't work. And in fact, if you've got a good eye for things, you see the angles don't even line up with themselves. The right-hand angle is kicked out farther than the left-hand angle. Not only are they the wrong angle, but they don't even line up. Notice the mortise work on the door frames. For example, over here on this door frame, the mortise work, which is like little miniature bookshelves about eye level on the door frame. Notice that Duccio knows that if he wants to create the illusion you're looking at a real room here, those mortises had to be at angles with each other. But whatever angle they should be, it's not that one. In fact, you can even take in your textbook photograph a piece of paper or a ruler or a straight edge of some kind, and you'll notice that if you lay the piece of paper across there, the mortises don't even line up with each other. Not only is it the wrong angle, they don't even line up with each other. Notice the double doors hanging behind the angel back here. Duccio knows if he wants to create the illusion that you're looking at a real room, that those double doors need to be at angles to each other, but whatever angle those doors should be at, it's not that one. Can you imagine those doors closing and meeting? You know, I hope Joseph was supposed to be a carpenter. I hope he wasn't the carpenter on this house, because this is some pretty shoddy carpentry work. Notice the placement of the angel. Notice how you'll know what I mean if I say it kind of looks to me like the angel is hovering 6 inches off the ground and kicking off the wall. Well, it just looks kind of strange. I mean, I don't know. This is way outside my field of experience or expertise. I don't know. Maybe that's how angels move around the room. They kind of float in the air and kick off the furniture, but looks kind of strange to me. Now notice that Mary is reading a book. In fact, Mary's commonly portrayed as reading a book in Western painting. Here Mary's reading a book. The book is on a bookstand. Duccio knows if he wants to create the illusion that you're looking at a real bookstand here, that bookstand has to cast a shadow on the wall. But whatever shadow this bookstand would cast on the wall, it can't be this one. If you notice, the shadow is the same distance around the object that casts it. In real life, you don't see shadows like that, or I should say in real life, you don't see shadows like that unless beams of light come shooting out of your eyeballs, and I'll bet that doesn't happen very often. Duccio knows if he wants to create the illusion that you're looking at a real bookstand here, that the bookstand has to rest, that the bookstand is resting on a tripod here, and that those legs have to be at angles to each other. But whatever angle those legs should be at, it's not that one. That bookstand's getting ready to tip over. Mary is sitting on a desk here, which starts off okay in the middle of the room and then ends up, I'm not quite sure where, halfway up the wall. Now the point here isn't therefore Duccio is a bad artist. That's not my point at all. He's a much better artist than I am. My point is not to throw sticks at Duccio. But the point is to say, notice all the different things Duccio knows he needs to do to make the painting look real, but he's not quite sure how to do it. And that's part of the challenge. It's part of the job of accepting a challenge. You take on the task, and then, well, how do you do it? It's one thing to laugh at the ceiling beams, but then, well, what angle should those beams be at? Well, I don't know either. And making sure that all those little things are caught, the angles on the door, the legs on the tripod, is part of what makes a painting look real. But the person who during his own lifetime people said, you've done it, he's captured that sense of perspective, is Giotto. And now we're back to Giotto, figure 9-2 on page 53 briefly. Giotto, the founder of modern painting. Obviously that's a big title. Giotto's someone to know some things about. Giotto's most famous individual painting you have in your textbook, figure 9-9 on page 56. Or, if my computer will wake up, there we go. On the screen, figure 9-9 on page 56, Giotto's Pieta. The common title for the painting, the Pieta. I also gave you the longer title, which shows up every once in a while, the Lamentation over the Dead Christ. Lamentation is a fancy word that means crying. Here we have Giotto's Pieta, figure 9-9 in your textbook on page 56, and also on the screen here. First, the technical stuff here. This is an example of a second type of paint for us. In the previous session, I discussed tempera paint with you. That's paint based in egg yolk. On the screen, you see example of fresco painting, painting that's based in wet plaster. Plaster is a thick layer of which is laid over the wall. It's made up of gypsum powder and all kinds of small pebbles and things that blend together to make like a paste. And then that paste is applied to the wall, and it solidifies and sticks to the wall. I'm having some difficulty because I'm used to talking in a class about plaster. I can just simply point at the wall and say there's plaster over the sheetrock in this room. So now I had to think about what plaster actually is. It's like a heavy paint itself, but it's a very thick substance which covers the wall. To make a fresco painting, the paint is painted directly onto a wall. You go to a wall with a bucket of wet plaster, you spread the plaster out on the wall, and then you dip your brush into the pigment, into the powdered coloring agent, and you move the brush through the plaster until the plaster absorbs the color. And when that color is in the shape and texture and tone and all that you want, then you move on to the next color until you fill in an area, maybe a foot square, 2 feet square, then you move to the next space, then the next space, until you've filled in the area you've been assigned to paint. Fresco painting is a much durable paint than tempera paint, as you can imagine, but it doesn't last forever either. Plaster makes a good base for paint. It's a liquid, it's sticky, it dries hard, and when it dries, it's about the same color it is when it's wet, so it actually makes a good base for a paint. Well, here we have an example of fresco painting, and we're going to come across fresco painting several times in the semester. Painted directly onto the wall with the paint itself soaked into the plaster on the wall. Well, here to the painting itself, we have the Pieta. That's not only the title of this particular painting, but also describes the painting. This is a Pieta. We're going to see several examples of Pietas in this course. You have a Pieta when you have two things. When you have the dead Jesus in the arms of his mother. Down here we have the dead body of Jesus removed from the cross in the arms of his mother, the woman in the dark blue color here that we associate with Mary traditionally in Western painting. When we have these two things in a painting or a sculpture or a piece of music or a poem or whatever, then we describe that painting or sculpture or music or whatever as a Pieta. Well, notice some things about the painting. You notice the golden discs around the head. Those are called halos. Halos commonly depict people of special holiness and significance in Western painting. Notice the use of perspective here, how the angels zipping through the air up there, screaming in anguish. Their bodies are smaller than the bodies in the foreground because they're farther away. Notice the rounded backs of Jesus' female disciples at the bottom of the painting. The rounded backs of these female disciples down here. The rounded arm of the Apostle John here. These are the traditional colors for John. The angels' bodies smaller because they're farther away. I know that's not rocket science stuff, I'm just pointing it out to you. The tree back here in the background, adding that sense of depth, perspective. And the dead tree, which is added to the emotional response a lot of people have had to the painting, particularly in person. I've got some other examples of Giotto's paintings here to show you that aren't in the textbook, but just to reinforce the point for you. Here's another example of Giotto's paintings, another fresco. You see how there are cracks in the background. A lot of the painting has come off the plaster. Notice the amount of attention to detail that Giotto gives to the figures here. I think you can make out here the individual hairs in the beard, the jewels in the crown, the folds of cloth on the robe, the individual fingernails and so on. And then look at the camel. It looks like the camel fell out of a Cracker Jack box or something. Obviously what's important for Giotto, people are camels. People. When it comes time to doing the camels, it's just blah, 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 well, there's a camel. But then notice the amount of attention to individual detail that Giotto gives to the people. Well, there's one more group of artists to talk about out of the 14th century. And this is on page 57, figures 9, 10, 9, 11, and 9, 12. You have three examples of work by the Limburg brothers. The Limburg brothers, there are three of them. They work together in a studio. Here's an idea. You take the months of the year, the days of the week, and so on, and make a calendar with a picture that goes along with that time of the year. On the screen in figure 910 in your textbook, you have the scene from February. Notice down here the pigeons, which are eating some grain that's been put out for them to keep them around in the winter times. They don't fly south because you can eat pigeons. That looks okay. Back here, and again this shows up better in your textbook photograph, you have a village in the background. You see a church and a spire there. That looks okay. Everything else there, though, is all messed up. Coming back down to the pigeons down here, all the way across the sheep pen, the sheep coat, which looks like it's going to tip over, all the way past the beehives back here, all the way out in the woods is like the world's tallest golfer or something. He's cutting down a tree, I know. Back here we have Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox heading off to town. Notice the radical difference in body size of the figures in the warming shed here. And notice how there's kind of a warp to that warming shed. I'm not quite sure what the floor plan would look like there. Now the point here isn't therefore the Limburg brothers are bad artists. The point is, notice all the different things they need to do to make the scene look real, and they're not quite sure how to do it. But that's part of the challenge of accepting the task of reinventing this art form.